asking questions.
Looking for answers.
Here's more of Montreal Now
with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
Welcome back. David Heurtel in for Aaron and Natasha. Well, this year was, let's just say, a very difficult year when you're talking about anti-Semitism here in Montreal and around the world, let's face it. Even before the October 7th attacks, it was a subject of real concern here in our community. And one of the first guests I wanted on this week was our next guest, Yudin, who is the vice president of the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, to talk about this and have a real conversation. Ita, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So before I get to what has transpired since the October 7th attacks, I think it's important to talk about the fact that before October 7th, we were having a lot of conversations about the rise of anti-Semitism here in Montreal and pretty much everywhere in the civilized world.
Absolutely, and we had many conversations about our concerns, our specific concerns about a dramatic rise, and we've seen the numbers go up every year. And we've seen incidents that were troubling even in Montreal long before the events of the last few months. And October 7th just, I think, brought everything out. Made a lot more things clear and certainly escalated the level of concern that we all should have about the rise of anti-Semitism, not just in Montreal, but around the world. But I can tell you in the short window of time since October 7th, we've long surpassed the number of incidents that took place in all of 2022, which were exactly what you're saying, already raising alarm bells about the increase in anti-Semitism.
So I remember we actually spoke. It was on October 9th. It was Thanksgiving. It was and I was filling in, and you were kind enough to come on as one of the leaders of our Jewish community here in Montreal to share your initial reactions to these horrible attacks. Since then we've seen really disturbing incidents, gunshots. I don't want to go down the whole list, but I mean there was gunshots at Jewish schools, vandalism. There were speeches calling for the genocide of the Jewish people. The chants from the river to the sea from people who didn't even know which river or which sea we were talking about, and we could go down the list. But I guess my first question right now is, how is the community doing, in your opinion, right now here in Montreal, the Jewish community here in Montreal?
So I'm going to tell you, we all had, I think, the same reaction when we saw people gathered in the streets of Montreal right after October 7th. And long before there was any talk of any kind of retaliation, celebrating the massacre of Jews by barbaric terrorists by distributing candies in the streets of Montreal. And I think that set the tone for many about how we felt and how we looked at the situation in Montreal. And that is, for me, a moment I won't ever forget. It's one thing when you see these things far away and you know that it happens. We know that when there are terror attacks, there are celebrations. But it's quite another when we see that happening here at home, where we value our vivre ensemble and we have such a beautiful place to live, and we see that kind of expression of hate. And it's a little scary. And I think that started a very long, difficult period of time. October 7th represented, and you and I have had this conversation, the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust. And, you know, we say it was an attack on Jews and we talk about Israel and everyone thinks about Jews, but it's important to understand that the population of Israel and the population of the South and the victims of October 7th were not just Jews. There were many foreign visitors and locals.
We saw with the release of hostages. There weren't all Israelis that were released and who are still being hostages today.
Yeah, and some were Israelis who were Muslim, who were Druze, who were Bedouin, who were Christian, who risked their lives to try to save others because everyone was under attack in the same barbaric way. So on the one hand, we've seen something in Israel play out where the population has come together, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Bedouin, Druze, to try to fight against this, threat of terror. And we've seen something in the diaspora. We've seen something around the world where those who have this inclination towards hate and anti-Semitism seem to have this liberty or feeling that, more is allowed now. We can say more about Jews. We can do more, push the limits. And that's what we're concerned about. And that's, frankly, why when I say we should all be concerned, it's not just an attack on the Jewish community. It's an attack on our way of life. It's an attack on our society, on our democracy. And we need to do something about it, and rather quickly, I think.
I totally agree. Now, to bring it back here in Montreal, I remember when there were the incidents involving schools being shot up. Our police chief, Adi Daguerre, was on vacation. He came back. He said, we're going to be working with the community. We're going to step it up. I remember at the time, even that week following these incidents, I spoke with the Canadian Minister for Public Security, Dominique LeBlanc, saying CSIS and the RCMP are on the case, collaborating. François Bonnardel had big meetings with the Sûreté du Québec and the police here in Montreal about ensuring security. Here we are, December 26th. Do you feel safer? Does the Jewish community here in Montreal feel safer? Has something been actually done, and can you actually feel it and see it?
So on that question, I have to say that we've had excellent collaboration with the SPVM, Fadi Dagger, as well as many others within the SPVM have been incredible in terms of being vigilant, ensuring a high visibility around Jewish community institutions and our community, in being accessible every time. Unfortunately, every time there was an incident, I say unfortunately because there were so many incidents, but every time there was an incident, we had immediate contact with the SPVM, who were very fast to respond. And we've had an incredible outpouring of support from political leadership. François Legault, Martine Biron, Benoît Charette, Pascal Derry, Bernard Tranville, Christopher Skeed, and many, many others, Elizabeth Prass. Many others have been really outspoken. Anthony Housefather have been really outspoken in terms of condemning what's going on and expressing solidarity with the Jewish community for what we have been experiencing here. What I will say is, and I think it's important to say because we're not really talking about what's happening far away, we're talking about what's happening here. But my heart breaks for civilian loss on all sides, I think, as does everyone. And I think part of the concern is there are many people who join some of these protests and some of these chants in the streets and don't really know what they're saying, and really mean all of the best, because I think we should be united in our concern for all civilians. And I think we all want the same thing. We want peace and security. And I personally want freedom for the Palestinian people from the oppression of Hamas, who continue to use Palestinian civilians as human shields. Just yesterday or 2 days ago, there was a story about Hamas firing on Palestinians who were trying to access humanitarian aid. And so we all want that to end, and we all want to turn the page and wake up to a much better story in the Middle East. But I think people need to do some research and understand what they're chanting, because what those chants mean and what they're saying is directly inciting violence and anti-Semitism against the Jewish community. And when people say intifada until the end, glory to the martyrs, from the river to the sea, they may sound cute, and it certainly rhymes, but it doesn't mean what people think it means. Intifada were rounds of terrorist attacks on Israeli civilians, suicide bombers in restaurants and cafes, targeting civilians across the country. Glory to the martyrs, they're talking about terrorists who went and killed and massacred and butchered civilians. And from the river to the sea, I would invite your listeners to take a look at their cell phone, which I'm sure no one has very far away from them, even during this holiday break. And just picture it. On one side, there's a river. That's Israel. On one side, there's a river. On one side, there's a sea. It's a tiny little country. But if you're freeing from the river to the sea, where exactly do you think all the Israeli citizens are going?
Well, there you go.
And so I think people have to, take a few minutes and think about how best they can advance the cause of the people they're concerned about. And it's certainly not by inciting hatred and violence against Jewish communities around the world, and certainly not our Quebec Jewish community.
We will continue our conversation with Ita Yudin of CIJA after we check in with Tom Whalen. Welcome back. David Heurtel in for Aaron and Natasha, continuing my conversation with Ita Yudin, Vice President of the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. Ita, I want to go over a few events that have transpired here in Montreal, in Quebec, and in Canada that have a direct impact on the Jewish community. First, we have a racism commissioner here in Montreal, Beauchamp and I saw them posted on her social media pages, very clear support for the pro-Palestinian cause, but even going a step further, you and others called her out for it, called out Montreal Mayor Valérie Plante. You asked, CIJA asked for her resignation. She has not resigned, saying that she was going to reach out to the Jewish community. Has she reached out to you? Has there been any type of dialogue since then? And is your position still that she doesn't have the credibility and the moral standing to continue on as racism commissioner in Montreal?
So I'm glad you brought it up, David. Look, leaders are tested in crisis, and it's moments in crisis. It's in moments of crisis that you know whether someone is up to the task or not. And I want to be clear, it's not because she shared or attended something that was pro one side or another. She shared social media posts from the very group that organized the candy distribution the day after October 7th.
Yeah.
And she was present at the protests where chants to the death of Jews were applauded, and didn't feel necessary to call it out, to condemn it, to distance herself from it. She just shared that she was happy to be there.
Yep.
For the role of anti-racism commissioner for the city of Montreal, we're looking, and people, all citizens of Montreal, are looking for someone that they feel they can go to who will be able to provide a safe space and protect and understand their interests. And she demonstrated without a doubt that she is not up to the task. And it's at this point, she chose not to resign. It's her choice. At this point, it's up to Mayor Plante to take action, decisive action, and make sure that in that kind of role which she created, there is someone who is up to the task and who can be that voice in a time of crisis. And sadly, the person occupying that space right now is not the right person for the job.
Has Mayor Plante indicated anything different in conversation with you since then?
I think she reminded her of her requirement for objectivity. And again, that's like a red herring. It's not about objectivity. People have their own personal beliefs, and, that's really not the issue. The issue is when you have a public role, and whether her responsibilities lie within the employees of Montreal or the city of Montreal, or however you define the role, she is in a public role. She has a responsibility and an opportunity. Someone in that role could have certainly used the moment to send a strong message about what's acceptable and not acceptable when we see a rise of hate and a rise of anti-Semitism at the terrifying rates that we're seeing. And she was not that person. And so, did she offer to meet with us? I'm not sure what that conversation would have led to. And I don't really, she may be suited for something else. I'm not, it's not about her as an individual. It's about whether she is the right person for this particular role. And she was tested in real life. Not everyone gets that test. Some people occupy roles for years and years and are never challenged with real life events. She was. And it's clear the writing is on the wall, and the mayor needs to do something about it, and we'll continue to call for her to do so.
I want to talk about universities now. We saw in the U.S. following a very, very difficult congressional hearing where we saw the heads of three of the most prestigious universities, not only in the U.S., but in the world, Harvard, Penn, and MIT, where there was this apparently very simple question. Seemed simple to me. Does calling for the genocide of the Jewish people correspond to harassment according to the codes of conduct in these universities? And we saw all three presidents really respond in a bizarre, ambiguous way, which led to the resignation of the UPenn president. We had incidents here. The most famous one was at Concordia, the confrontation between pro-Palestinian students and pro-Israeli students. How do you feel about what the situation is in our universities? I'm not saying that it's exactly the same here in Montreal or in Canada that it is in the U.S., but there is a conversation about what type of messages are being given to students by faculty about Israel, about the Jewish community. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about this, because even Anthony Housefather and some other MPs have written a letter to the 25 presidents of the top 25 universities in Canada, asking them basically the same question that was asked of these three university presidents of the U.S. So I wonder what your thoughts are about this situation in our learning institutions.
So what happened in the U.S. And the testimony of those three presidents, I think, opened a huge window into what's really broken in our academic institutions that are clearly failing our students. What happened in Montreal, look, on November 8th, I think it's also important to set the table for what happened. A group of Jewish students had a table, and I'm not even sure all the students were Jewish and allied students had a table, raising awareness about, at the time, the 250 hostages that were still being held by Hamas terrorists in Gaza. And a very clear attempt to disrupt their event was undertaken by a group of activists. And Campus University was there, and adults were in the room to ensure it didn't go out of control. And that group of agitators really crossed the line between expressing themselves and rallying for a cause and intimidating, harassing, and in some cases pushing students. You had a student all proudly using the K word. You had Jewish students being pushed and threatened. That's not a conflict between two sides. That's an attempt to agitate, intimidate Jewish students on campus. And that's what we're seeing at different levels across campuses in North America. So we didn't reach the levels of Jewish students being locked in a cafeteria for safety like it happened in the U.S. But do we need to? Action needs to be taken now. A strong message needs to be sent that people will be held accountable for these kinds of actions. And I would say that the same holds true for professors who engage in abuse of podium. It's a real problem, and it doesn't only affect Jewish students. It happens on other issues where professors, play to their biases on different issues, and students are forced to conform. And your grade depends on how your professor sees you. And if you have a professor that says you have to write a paper documenting why this is true, even when it's not, what are you supposed to do as a student? And what are you supposed to do when a professor in, I don't know, some random field, occupational therapy, uses case studies that have nothing to do with the course that you're taking? So students are under a lot of pressure. They're feeling it in situations of abuse of podium. They're feeling it with these kinds of intimidations on campus. And you had one of the most prominent faces from the videos of November 8th at Concordia on the steps of McGill the next day saying we terrified them. So if anyone has any question as to what's really happening, that's what's happening. She was patting herself on the back for terrifying the Jewish students. And until universities can hold people accountable, whether it's a professor who engages in abuse of podium or students who cross the line. I mean, are these the kinds of students that are the ones who are going to create pride in an institution? I don't think so. I personally went to McGill, and I'm proud of McGill, and I want to continue to be proud of McGill. And those people who went to Concordia feel the same way about Concordia. And we can't allow this kind of situation to hijack these institutions. Principals, presidents, administrators need to take decisive action and make clear what is unacceptable on campus, what will not be tolerated. And if it means suspensions, expulsions, a note on your file, whatever it is, there must be consequences to these kinds of actions. And what we saw in the U.S. was 3 presidents who were so briefed for possible questions that they couldn't risk. I mean, if you had been asked those questions, I have every confidence, knowing you as I do, that you would have answered them properly. What context is there for genocide?
I don't know what. I totally understand, Ita, and I just want to add also a Université de Montreal faculty member was part of that group at Concordia, hurling insults and horrible things at the group of Jewish students and allies, as you said. I fear that we're going to need to talk about this much more, because I do think something is going on in our universities that is laid dormant for way, way, way too long. Ita, I have to leave it there. Thank you so much for spending 2 segments with us today. I thought it was really important to take this time to maybe go a little bit deeper than we have news items to tackle and the hustle bustle of regular days. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and I wish you all the best and just better situations for 2024.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and to all your listeners and everyone. I know we talked about a serious topic, but still wishing everyone peaceful, joyous holidays, and better things to come in 2024.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Ita. Ita Yudin, Vice President of the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs.